I didn't lose my wife the day she left. I lost her the day I realized she never loved me at all. She smiled at me in public, but counted my worth in private. I thought I was building a marriage. She was calculating an investment. Every kiss had a price. Every I love you came with a condition. The house wasn't our dream. It was her requirement. The car wasn't freedom. It was proof. I worked longer hours thinking I was providing, while she was silently waiting for something better. When money was flowing, I was her everything. When it slowed down, I became her biggest mistake. I didn't marry a woman who loved me. I married a woman who loved what I could give her. And the day I needed emotional support, she showed me her real balance sheet. She didn't ask how I felt. She asked how much I had left. That was the moment I understood the truth men are never warned about. Some women don't fall in love with you. They fall in love with your lifestyle. And when the lifestyle fades, so does the marriage. This isn't a story about hatred. It's a story about awakening. It's about the silence men carry, the pressure they swallow, the sacrifices nobody thanks them for. I stayed loyal. I stayed committed. I stayed blind. Until the day she finally said the words that shattered everything. This isn't what I signed up for. That sentence destroyed years of effort and exposed the marriage for what it truly was. If you've ever felt used instead of loved, if you've ever wondered whether your value comes from your heart or your wallet, then listen carefully. Because this story isn't just about my marriage. It's about a reality too many men live and too few talk about. This is how I discovered my wife married me for money, not love. And what happened next changed my life forever. I used to believe love was built slowly, brick by brick, through effort, patience, and sacrifice. I believed that if I showed up every day, worked hard, and stayed loyal, love would naturally grow. No one ever told me that sometimes you're not being loved, you're being evaluated. Looking back now, the signs were there from the very beginning. I just didn't want to see them. When I first met her, she wasn't loud or dramatic. She was calm, graceful, and carried herself like someone who knew exactly what she wanted out of life. That confidence pulled me in. She spoke about ambition, about building something together, about stability and growth. Those words felt mature, responsible, safe. I thought, this woman sees a future. What I didn't realize was that she wasn't imagining us in that future. She was imagining a standard of living. At the time, I was doing well. Not rich, not flashy, but stable. I had a steady income, clear goals, and a strong work ethic. I took pride in providing, even before marriage. I believed a man's responsibility was to protect, provide, and stay committed. That belief was stitched into my identity. She admired that about me, or at least I thought she did. She used to say things like, "I feel safe with you. I know you'll always take care of things. You're not like other men." Those words felt like love. Now I know they were qualifications. During our dating phase, I noticed how her mood subtly shifted depending on circumstances. When things were going well, when I paid for trips, dinners, and handled unexpected expenses without complaint, she was affectionate, attentive, almost glowing. But whenever finances came up in a serious way, her tone changed. She never argued directly. She didn't shout or demand. She did something far more dangerous. She withdrew. Silence replaced warmth. Distance replaced connection. If I hesitated before a big expense, she'd sigh quietly. If I mentioned budgeting, she'd say, "I just thought we wanted more out of life." I told myself she was just ambitious. I told myself this was normal. Men are taught to normalize discomfort. We're taught that pressure is proof of purpose. So I ignored the knot forming in my chest. When I proposed, she cried, but not the kind of cry you imagine. It wasn't overwhelming emotion. It was relief. That should have told me something. Our engagement period was filled with planning, but not emotional planning. Everything revolved around logistics, venues, costs, guest lists, expectations. I was proud to handle most of it. I wanted her to feel secure. I didn't realize I was already being measured. Marriage, I thought, would deepen our bond. Instead, it clarified the transaction. The first year wasn't bad. In fact, on the surface, it looked successful. We had a nice place. We traveled occasionally. I worked longer hours to ensure comfort. She told people I was a great provider. That phrase followed me everywhere. Not loving husband, not best friend, not partner. Provider. At first, I wore it like a badge of honor. But something subtle began to shift. Our conversations stopped being about us. They became about upgrades, a bigger place, a newer car, a better neighborhood. When I asked what she wanted emotionally, she'd respond with practical answers. I just want stability. I want to feel secure. I don't want to struggle. Struggle. A word that terrified her. A word I was willing to face head on. Every man understands that life has seasons. You climb, you plateau, sometimes you fall. But marriage, I believed, was supposed to be the place where you're allowed to fall. Because someone will help you stand back up. I was wrong. The first real crack appeared when work became stressful. Not catastrophic, just challenging. Long hours, tighter margins, more responsibility. I was tired, mentally drained. I didn't need solutions. I needed support. One night, I sat beside her and admitted, I'm under a lot of pressure lately. She didn't ask how I was holding up. She didn't ask what I needed. She asked, is this going to affect our lifestyle? That question hit me harder than any insult ever could. I laughed it off, because that's what men do. We swallow discomfort and call it strength, but inside, something shifted. I began to notice patterns. Affection appeared when things were going well. Distance appeared when uncertainty showed up. If I came home exhausted, she'd say, you chose this. If I wanted to slow down, she'd say, this isn't what I expected. Expected. That word started echoing in my mind. Expected what? A man or a machine? I realized she never asked about my dreams anymore. Only my plans, only my projections, only my next move. I was no longer a husband, I was a strategy. And the more I gave, the more was required. I bought the things she wanted. I upgraded what she hinted at. I told myself I was investing in my marriage, but investments are supposed to grow together. This one felt like it was draining me. Emotionally, I felt invisible. Physically, I was present. Financially, I was reliable. But emotionally, I was alone. When I tried to talk about connection, she'd say, you're overthinking. When I tried to talk about appreciation, she'd say, I don't ask for much. That sentence haunted me. Because she did ask for much, just not out loud. She asked with silence, with disappointment, with comparison. She'd mention other couples casually. Look how well he's doing. They're always traveling. She never has to worry about money. Each comment felt small, but together, they formed a verdict. I wasn't enough. And yet, I kept pushing. Men are conditioned to believe their worth increases with sacrifice. So I sacrificed more. More hours, more energy, more of myself. Until one night something happened that forced me to confront a truth I'd been avoiding. We were at a gathering. Nothing fancy. Just people talking about life. Someone asked her how married life was treating her. She smiled politely and said, it's good. He takes care of things. That was it. No warmth, no pride, no affection, just function. I realized then that she didn't see me. She saw what I maintained. On the drive home, the silence between us felt heavier than usual. I finally asked calmly, do you feel loved? She hesitated. That hesitation lasted longer than any argument ever could. I feel secure, she said. That answer shattered something in me. Because love doesn't hesitate. Security can be purchased. Love cannot. That night, lying beside her, I stared at the ceiling and asked myself a question I should have asked years earlier. If everything I provide disappeared, would she still choose me? I already knew the answer. But admitting it felt like betrayal, not of her, but of myself. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was heartbroken in a quiet, masculine way. The kind that doesn't scream but sinks. I realized I had built my entire identity around being useful instead of being valued. And that realization marked the beginning of the end. Because once a man sees the truth, he can't unsee it. And the truth was this: she didn't marry me for who I was. She married me for what I could maintain. And when that maintenance showed signs of strain, so did the marriage. What I didn't know yet was how brutally clear she would make that fact, and how fast everything I believed about love would collapse. There's a moment in every man's life when denial finally loses its grip, not because someone confesses, not because the truth is shouted, but because silence becomes too loud to ignore. After that night, the night she said she felt secure, not loved, I stopped sleeping properly. I'd lie awake beside her, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, wondering how two people could share a bed and still feel worlds apart. I didn't confront her immediately. Men rarely do. We analyze, we observe, we hope we're wrong. So I started paying attention, and what I noticed changed everything. Her affection wasn't random. It followed patterns, predictable, measurable patterns. When money flowed easily, she was lighter, she laughed more, she initiated closeness, she spoke about the future with excitement. When things slowed, even slightly, her energy shifted. She became distant, distracted, critical. It wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, which made it more dangerous. Subtle things are easier to excuse. I told myself I was being paranoid, that stress was making me sensitive, that all marriages go through phases, but deep down a voice kept whispering, "This isn't a phase. This is the truth revealing itself." The real test came a few weeks later. Work hit a rough patch. Not failure, just uncertainty, delays, decisions pending, nothing permanent, nothing unmanageable. But uncertainty terrifies people who marry for comfort. I came home one evening mentally exhausted. I didn't complain, I didn't dramatize. I simply said, the next few months might be tighter than usual. She didn't look at me, she didn't ask questions, she didn't ask how serious it was. She said, "What do you mean by tighter?" That tone, controlled, calculating, made my chest tighten. "I just mean we'll need to be a little more mindful," I said. "It's temporary." She finally looked at me then, and in her eyes I didn't see concern. I saw evaluation. "Mindful how?" she asked. I mentioned small adjustments. Fewer unnecessary expenses, postponing a few upgrades, being practical. Her jaw tightened. "This isn't what I signed up for," she said quietly. There it was again, that sentence, like a receipt pulled from a drawer. Signed up for what exactly? A marriage? Or a subscription plan? I tried to stay calm. I explained that this was normal, that life moves in cycles, that this didn't change who I was or what I was committed to. She listened, but she wasn't hearing me. She was imagining loss. Loss of status, loss of comfort, loss of comparison. That night she slept facing away from me. That might sound small, but when affection disappears the moment provision is questioned, it tells you everything you need to know. Over the next few days I noticed something else. She started spending more time on her phone, not scrolling mindlessly, studying, profiles, messages, conversations that paused when I entered the room. She smiled at the screen in a way she hadn't smiled at me in months. I didn't accuse her, I didn't spy. I just watched, and what I saw was enough. She began mentioning other men, casually, almost innocently. "So-and-so just got promoted. Did you hear how well that guy is doing now? He really leveled up." Each comment was delivered lightly, but they landed heavily. She wasn't cheating, at least not physically, but emotionally, she was already browsing replacements. That's when I understood something men rarely admit out loud. Some people don't leave when things get bad. They leave when they see better options, and I had become a risk. One evening I asked her directly, "Are you happy?" She paused. Again, that hesitation returned. "I don't know," she said. "I just thought my life would look different by now." Different, not deeper, not more meaningful. Different. That word crushed me. Because it wasn't about love, it was about optics. I asked, "Does that include me?" She looked at me like I'd asked the wrong question. "I just need to feel like I'm moving forward," she said. Forward. As if I were standing still, even though I was carrying everything. I realized then that my presence in her life wasn't emotional. It was logistical. I wasn't a partner. I was a platform. And platforms are only appreciated as long as they elevate. That night something broke inside me, not loudly, quietly. I stopped trying to convince her. Stopped explaining. Stopped overextending myself emotionally. Instead, I watched. And the more I watched, the clearer it became. She didn't ask how I was feeling anymore. She asked about timelines. She didn't ask about stress. She asked about outcomes. She didn't see me as a man going through pressure. She saw me as a provider showing signs of wear. One afternoon, she said something that sealed it. We were talking about plans, or rather, she was. She said, "I just don't want to end up stuck." That word, stuck, cut deep. Because to her, I was the risk of being stuck. Not circumstances, not uncertainty. Me. I asked softly, "Do you think being with me is holding you back?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I just need to be realistic." Realistic. As if love were unrealistic. As if loyalty were optional. As if commitment had an expiration date tied to income. That was the moment I realized I was replaceable. Not because I failed, but because I wasn't guaranteed. And for someone who married for money, guarantees matter more than hearts. I started reflecting on everything. The compliments she gave were always tied to provision. The praise always followed purchases. The affection always followed stability. When I surprised her emotionally, she was indifferent. When I surprised her materially, she was thrilled. I had mistaken appreciation for love, and that mistake cost me years. One night, I overheard her on the phone. She was in another room laughing softly. "I just want someone who's already there," she said. "Someone established. Established. Not becoming, not growing, not building, already there." That sentence echoed in my head like a verdict. I wasn't her dream. I was her stepping stone. That realization hurt more than betrayal, because betrayal implies deception. This was something worse. It was conditional commitment. I confronted her the next day, not angrily, not emotionally, calmly. I asked, "If everything I provide stopped tomorrow, would you still want to be with me?" She stared at me, longer than comfort allows. Then she said, "Why would you even ask that?" Because the answer was already there. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She deflected. And deflection is an answer. That was the day I stopped fighting for reassurance, because love doesn't need to be negotiated. That night, I sat alone and thought about the man I'd become. I had poured my identity into being needed instead of being known. I had confused responsibility with worth. I had believed that if I gave enough, I would be chosen. But being chosen for what you provide is not love. It's convenience. And convenience has no loyalty. I realized something else too, something uncomfortable. She wasn't evil. She wasn't malicious. She was honest about what she valued. I was the one who ignored it, and that truth was harder to accept, because it meant I had participated in my own erasure, by never asking to be loved, only useful. But the real turning point was still coming, because soon she wouldn't just imply it, she would say it, clearly, coldly, in words no man forgets, and those words would finally force me to choose between my dignity and a marriage built on conditions. There are words that echo for a lifetime, not because they're loud, not because they're cruel, but because they expose a truth you spent years avoiding. After the question I asked, the one she refused to answer, the atmosphere between us changed permanently, not in an explosive way, in a quiet, uncomfortable way that made every room feel colder. We moved around each other like coworkers sharing an office after a disagreement neither wants to address. She was polite, I was distant, and beneath that surface-level calm, something ugly was growing. I wasn't angry yet, I was observant, and observation, I learned, can be far more painful than confrontation. She started treating me differently. Not overt disrespect, not yet, but impatience. If I spoke about work, she'd interrupt. If I spoke about stress, she'd minimize it. If I spoke about us, she'd redirect the conversation. Everything became transactional. "Did you pay that yet? When will that be done? What's the plan?" I noticed she no longer asked how I was doing, only when things would improve. Time in her mind had become my enemy, because time meant uncertainty, and uncertainty threatened her expectations. One evening I came home later than usual, exhausted, mentally drained. I sat down quietly, hoping for peace. She looked at me and said, "You've been off lately." I almost laughed. Off? I had been carrying pressure quietly for weeks, and now she noticed only because it affected her comfort. I said calmly, "I've been under a lot of pressure." She sighed. That sigh did more damage than shouting ever could. "You're always under pressure," she said. "Other men handle it without making it everyone else's problem." There it was. Comparison. Sharp. Unnecessary. Intentional. I asked, "Everyone else?" She hesitated for half a second, then said, "You know what I mean." No, I didn't, but I knew what she meant. She meant men who earn more, men who struggle less, men who provide without friction, men who never force her to feel the slightest discomfort, men who already have what she wants. That night, I didn't respond. I just stood up and walked away, because if I had stayed, I would have said something I couldn't take back. But silence, I was learning, was no longer protecting the marriage. It was protecting her comfort. Over the next few days, her behavior escalated. Not dramatically, strategically. She stopped contributing emotionally altogether. She'd come home, scroll on her phone, and speak only when necessary. When I tried to engage, she'd give one-word answers. Cold, detached, dismissive. The kind of detachment that makes you feel like a stranger in your own home. One afternoon, I overheard her on another phone call. This time, I didn't mean to listen, but when you hear your name spoken with a tone you don't recognize, you freeze. "I just don't know how long I can do this," she said. Pause. "I need more out of life." Pause. "No, I'm not saying he's a bad person. I'm just saying this isn't enough for me." That was it. Enough. I stood there, heart pounding, realizing something terrifying. She wasn't questioning the situation. She was questioning me. That night, I decided to stop avoiding the conversation. We sat down, face to face. No raised voices, no drama, just truth. I said, "I need to understand where you stand." She crossed her arms, defensive posture, closed. "I don't feel like you're moving fast enough," she said. Fast enough. As if life were a race and marriage a vehicle. I asked, "Fast enough for what?" She exhaled sharply. "For the life I want." There it was again. Not the life we want, not the future we're building, the life she wants. I asked, "And where do I fit into that?" She looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see partnership in her eyes. I saw assessment. She said, "I just need to be honest." That sentence always comes before damage. I thought I'd be further along by now. She continued. "I thought marriage would elevate things. Elevate. Not connect. Not deepen. Elevate." I asked quietly, "Do you love me?" She didn't answer immediately. That pause stretched into something unbearable. "I care about you," she said finally. Care. That word landed like a coffin lid. Because love doesn't downgrade itself under pressure. Care is what you feel for convenience. Love is what you fight for when it's hard. I felt something shift inside my chest, not heartbreak but clarity. I said, "You married me because you believed I would give you a certain life." She didn't deny it. She said, "I married you because you had potential." Potential. Not character. Not loyalty. Not heart. Potential. I asked, "And now?" She said the sentence that ended everything. "I don't want to wait forever." That was it. No anger, no tears, just cold finality. In that moment I realized my loyalty had been one-sided. I had been loyal to us. She had been loyal to an outcome. I stood up slowly, not because I was done, but because I needed air. As I walked away, she added something, almost casually. "I just don't want to struggle like my mother did." That statement exposed everything. Fear disguised as ambition, trauma disguised as standards. She wasn't evil. She was afraid. But fear does not justify using someone, and trauma does not excuse conditional love. I spent the next few days in silence, not punishing her, but processing. I replayed every moment of our relationship, every compliment tied to success, every argument tied to money, every affection tied to stability. I realized something devastating. She had never chosen me. She had chosen the version of life she thought I could deliver, and the moment that version seemed uncertain, her commitment cracked. I thought about all the times I had reassured her, all the times I had carried stress quietly, all the times I had put her comfort above my exhaustion. And I understood something painful. She never asked me to do those things. I volunteered, because I believed that was love. But love should never require erasing yourself. I remembered the man I was before her, confident, driven, grounded, and the man I had become, anxious, overextended, constantly proving. I had turned into a performance, and the audience was no longer impressed. One night she said something else that confirmed everything. She said, "I just want someone who can give me certainty. Certainty, not growth, not partnership, not resilience, certainty." I finally responded. I said, "Then you didn't want a husband, you wanted insurance." She didn't argue. Silence followed. That silence told me everything. Because when truth lands, there's nothing left to say. I realized then that loyalty without respect is self-destruction, and I had been destroying myself quietly for someone who saw me as replaceable. That was the night my loyalty died, not my values, not my integrity, just my loyalty to a marriage that was never built on love. But the story didn't end there, because when a man stops begging to be chosen, the dynamic changes. And what happened next revealed her true nature even more clearly. There's a strange thing that happens when a man stops trying to be enough. The world doesn't collapse. The sky doesn't fall. Instead, masks begin to slip. After that conversation, after she admitted she didn't want to wait forever, something inside me shut off, not emotionally in a dramatic sense, but instinctively, like a circuit breaker flipping when the system is overloaded. I stopped over-explaining, stopped justifying, stopped trying to reassure someone who had already decided what I was worth. For the first time in our marriage, I chose silence, not the kind that punishes, but the kind that protects. And that's when her behavior changed. At first, she seemed confused. She noticed I wasn't chasing the conversation anymore. I wasn't trying to fix the tension. I wasn't offering promises or timelines. I went to work. I came home. I handled responsibilities, calmly. But I stopped performing. No extra reassurance, no emotional bargaining, no trying to win her back. That shift unsettled her, because when someone is used to being pursued, they panic when pursuit ends. She started asking questions, not about how I felt, but about what I was doing. "You've been quiet lately," she said one evening. "I'm thinking," I replied. "About what?" she asked quickly. "About my life." That answer made her uncomfortable, because when a man starts thinking about his life, he's no longer centered around pleasing someone else. She tried a different approach. One day she was unusually affectionate. She cooked dinner. She laughed louder than usual. She touched my arm casually. Old me would have mistaken that for reconnection. New me recognized it for what it was, a test. Affection returned not because love was rediscovered, but because control was slipping. I didn't reject her, but I didn't reward the behavior either. I stayed neutral. That neutrality frustrated her more than anger ever could. A few days later, she snapped. "What's going on with you?" she asked sharply. "You're acting different. Different." "That word again," I said calmly. "I'm just being myself," she scoffed. "Since when?" That question revealed more than she realized. Since when had I been allowed to exist without proving my value? Since when had I been more than a function? Her tone grew sharper. "You don't seem to care anymore," she said. I looked at her and asked, "Care about what?" She hesitated. "About us," she said. I didn't raise my voice. I said, "I care. I just stopped chasing approval." That sentence hit her like a slap, because approval was the currency of our marriage, and I had just stopped paying. Her frustration grew into resentment. She started criticizing small things, the way I dressed, the way I spoke, the way I spent my time. None of it was new, but it was more aggressive now. Because when manipulation stops working, disrespect steps in. She'd say things like, "You used to be more driven. You used to want more. You're not the man I married." I realized something chilling. She didn't miss me. She missed the version of me that overextended himself for her comfort. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. Because once you see that someone's love is conditional, you stop fearing the conditions. One night she confronted me directly. "Are you still committed to this marriage?" she asked. That question wasn't about love. It was about security. I said, "I'm committed to myself." Her eyes widened. "That's not what I asked," she said. "It's the most honest answer I can give," I replied. She accused me of changing. I didn't deny it. I said, "I'm changing because I realized I was disappearing." That statement exposed everything. She had no response. Because the truth doesn't argue, it reveals. Over the next weeks, her behavior escalated further. She started threatening loss indirectly. "I don't know how much longer I can live like this. I need more certainty. I need to feel chosen." The irony was unbearable. I had chosen her every day, with effort, loyalty, sacrifice. She only wanted to be chosen when it benefited her. I asked her one question that changed the dynamic permanently. I said, "If I stop providing what you expect, would you still want me?" She didn't answer. Instead, she said, "Why do you keep asking that?" Because it was the only question that mattered, and her silence was the answer. I realized then that love built on outcomes cannot survive self-respect. The more I grounded myself, the more irritated she became, because my calm took away her leverage. She couldn't guilt me anymore. She couldn't pressure me. She couldn't scare me. And fear was the foundation of her commitment. One evening, during an argument, she finally said something revealing. "You're becoming selfish," she said. Selfish, because I stopped overgiving, because I stopped apologizing for existing, because I stopped measuring my worth by her satisfaction. I responded calmly, "No, I'm becoming whole." That enraged her, because wholeness doesn't beg. She accused me of not caring about the future. I said it, "I care about a future that includes mutual respect." She rolled her eyes. That eye roll told me more than words ever could. Respect had left the building long ago. I began to notice something else. The more I detached emotionally, the more anxious she became. She checked my phone once. She questioned my schedule. She asked where I was going. Not out of love, out of fear. Fear of losing control, fear of losing the benefits, fear of losing the lifestyle she had attached herself to. It dawned on me that she wasn't afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing what I represented. And that truth hardened my resolve. One night, she said something that finally clarified everything. "I just don't recognize you anymore," she said. I looked at her and replied, "That's because you never knew me. You knew what I provided." Silence followed, heavy, final. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. Because the man she loved only existed when I was useful. And I was done being useful at the cost of my dignity. That was when I realized something powerful. When a man stops performing, a woman who married for money panics. Because performance is all she ever loved. And without it, there's nothing left. But the story didn't end with distance. It escalated. Because when manipulation and disrespect fail, ultimatums appear. And the ultimatum she gave me next would force a decision I had been avoiding, a decision that would change everything. Ultimatums don't arrive suddenly. They arrive when manipulation stops working. By the time she gave me hers, the marriage had already crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The warmth was gone. The pretending was gone. What remained was tension, sharp, silent, and constant. Every interaction felt like a negotiation. Every conversation felt like a test. And I was done being tested. She grew impatient with my calm. My neutrality unsettled her more than anger ever could. Anger she could frame as instability. Calm exposed clarity. One evening she stood in the doorway while I was getting ready for bed. Arms crossed, jaw tight. "We need to talk," she said. That sentence used to make my stomach drop. This time, it didn't. I sat down and waited. She didn't. She paced. "I can't keep living like this," she said. "I don't feel secure. I don't feel like you're leading anymore." Leading. Another word that had been weaponized. I asked, "What does leading look like to you?" She stopped pacing and looked at me. "It looks like certainty," she said. "It looks like progress. It looks like not having to worry." I nodded slowly. "And if life doesn't cooperate?" I asked. "If progress isn't linear? If certainty doesn't exist?" She sighed loudly. "I just don't want to struggle," she said. "I didn't get married to struggle." That sentence landed differently this time, because now I wasn't trying to fix it. I was listening. "Marriage," I said calmly, "isn't a guarantee against struggle. It's a partnership through it." She shook her head. "That's not how I see it." There it was. Different definitions of marriage, different expectations, different values, and no amount of effort bridges that gap. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and said it. "If things don't change soon, I don't know if I can stay." The ultimatum, delivered quietly, calculated, cold. She expected panic, she expected promises, she expected negotiation. Instead, she got silence. I looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear. I felt relief, because ultimatums reveal truths that words hide. "You're asking me to guarantee outcomes," I said. "And I can't," she responded instantly. "Then maybe we want different things." That sentence sealed it. I stood up slowly, not in anger, in clarity. "Yes," I said, "we do." She looked surprised. She hadn't expected agreement. She expected resistance. She expected me to fight. But a man who has reclaimed his dignity doesn't fight to stay where he's only tolerated for his utility. Her voice sharpened. "So you're just giving up?" "No," I replied. "I'm choosing myself." That enraged her, because self-choice threatens control. She accused me of abandoning her, of changing the rules, of not being the man she married. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I said one sentence that ended the argument. "You didn't marry a man. You married a future you imagined." Silence. Her face hardened. "That's unfair," she said. "It's honest," I replied. She tried one last tactic. "Fear." "What happens if you end up alone?" she asked. "What if you regret this?" I looked at her and said something I'd never allowed myself to say before. "I'd rather be alone than be used." That was the moment everything shifted, because when a man stops fearing loneliness, he becomes impossible to manipulate. She stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Not as a provider, not as a solution, but as a man with boundaries. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She did something far more telling. She withdrew emotionally completely. That night, she slept without saying a word. The next morning, she acted distant but practical. She asked logistical questions. She discussed arrangements. She talked about options. No grief, no reflection, just efficiency. That told me everything I needed to know. People who love grieve. People who invest financially reorganize. I spent the next few days in a strange state of calm. Not happiness, not sadness. Clarity. I thought about everything I had tolerated. The pressure, the comparisons, the conditional affection. And I realized something painful but necessary. She hadn't destroyed me. I had abandoned myself slowly, one compromise at a time. The ultimatum didn't end the marriage. It ended the illusion. One night, as we sat in the same room doing separate things, she said something casually, almost carelessly. "I just thought you'd do more by now." That sentence didn't hurt, because it no longer mattered. I replied, "I've done enough to know who you are." She looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, "you don't love me. You love security." She scoffed. "Love doesn't pay bills," she said. And there it was. The most honest sentence she ever spoke. Love, to her, was optional. Provision was mandatory. That statement burned itself into my memory, because it proved everything. I realized then that staying would cost me my self-respect, and leaving would cost me comfort, but only one of those could be rebuilt. I began preparing quietly. Not out of revenge, not out of anger, out of self-preservation. I detached emotionally completely. No more debates, no more explanations, no more hope. She noticed. "You don't even try anymore," she said one day. I responded simply. I tried enough to learn the truth. That truth was simple. She never wanted a partner. She wanted protection from uncertainty. And when uncertainty appeared, she blamed the man instead of facing life. I didn't hate her. I understood her. But understanding doesn't mean staying. As days passed, the tension turned into inevitability. We were no longer married in spirit. We were roommates negotiating an ending. But the final confirmation, the moment I knew there was no return, was still coming, and it would come from her own mouth. A sentence so revealing, so final, that it would erase any remaining doubt. There's a strange kind of peace that comes after devastation, not the kind you celebrate, the kind you accept. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't hopeful. I wasn't trying to fix anything. I had crossed into a phase most men don't talk about, the moment when your heart stops negotiating with reality. We were still living under the same roof, but emotionally, the marriage was already over. Conversations were short, polite, transactional. We spoke like two people closing a business that no longer made sense. And then one afternoon, without warning, she said the sentence that erased every remaining ounce of guilt from my heart. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't dramatic. It was casual. That's what made it unforgettable. We were sitting across from each other, discussing practical matters, timelines, options, next steps. Her tone was calm, almost relieved. Then she said, "I just don't think love alone is enough." I looked at her. She continued, "I need stability. I need certainty. Feelings don't protect you." That was it, the final truth. In that moment, everything clicked. All the pressure, all the comparisons, all the emotional distance. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't stress. It was philosophy. Her worldview was simple. Love is optional. Provision is mandatory. And I had married someone who believed that deeply. I didn't argue. I didn't debate. I nodded, because for the first time she wasn't pretending. She wasn't masking expectations behind romance or ambition. She was being honest. And honesty, even when it hurts, is liberating. I realized something powerful in that moment. She didn't betray me. She never lied. I just heard what I wanted to hear. I had projected my definition of love onto someone who never shared it, and that realization removed all bitterness. You can't resent someone for being exactly who they've always been. I asked her one question. "Did you ever love me without what I provided?" She paused. Then she said something that stunned me. "I don't know how to separate the two." That answer freed me, because love that can't exist without benefit isn't love. It's attachment. She wasn't cruel about it. She wasn't mocking. She was matter-of-fact, which made it even more final. I saw clearly then that we were incompatible at the deepest level, not morally, not emotionally, existentially. We believed in different foundations. To her, a man's value was measured by outcomes. To me, a man's value included loyalty, effort, and presence. Those two belief systems cannot coexist in marriage. Someone always loses. And that someone was me. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked outside for a long time. I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because the marriage was ending, but because the confusion was. I finally understood why nothing I did ever felt enough. Because enough was a moving target, and I had been chasing it alone. When I turned back to her, I said calmly, "You didn't marry me for who I am." She didn't deny it. She said, "I married you for what I believed life with you would be." That sentence closed the book. I thanked her. She looked confused. "For what?" she asked. "For being honest," I said, "even if it came late." That gratitude shocked her, because she expected anger. She expected blame. But what she got was acceptance, and acceptance removes power. Over the next few days she became colder, not because she was hurt, but because she realized something important. I was no longer emotionally invested. I wasn't trying to convince her. I wasn't asking for reassurance. I wasn't negotiating. I had emotionally stepped out of the transaction. And that terrified her more than arguments ever could. She tried one last approach. "You're going to regret this," she said one night. "You're throwing away stability." I looked at her and said something that came from a place of deep clarity. Stability without love is a cage. She rolled her eyes. Love doesn't last forever, she said. Then neither should marriages built without it, I replied. She had no answer. Because logic doesn't work when values don't align. I spent long nights reflecting, not on what I lost, but on what I learned. I learned that men are taught to earn love, to prove worth, to equate sacrifice with value, and women like her, not evil, not cruel, are taught to choose security over connection. Those two teachings collide quietly, and marriages like mine are the result. I thought about the man I was becoming again. For the first time in years, I felt grounded, not confident in outcomes, but confident in myself. I realized something else too. If I stayed, I would slowly resent her. Not because she used me, but because I allowed it. And resentment would poison both of us. Leaving was the only honorable option. One evening, she said something else that confirmed everything. I just want someone who's already where I want to be. That sentence had no room for growth, no room for partnership, no room for humanity. It described a resource, not a husband. And that's when I knew, without doubt, that walking away wasn't abandonment. It was alignment. I told her calmly, I'm going to leave. She looked up quickly. When, she asked. Not why. Not are you okay, when. That response sealed it. I'll make arrangements, I said. She nodded. No tears, no grief, just acceptance. Because she wasn't losing love. She was losing convenience. That night, as I packed a small bag, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Lightness. Not because the future was clear, but because my conscience was. I wasn't running. I was reclaiming myself. And as I walked out of that house, the house I paid for, the house she loved more than me, I understood something that changed my life forever. A man who is valued only for what he provides will always be disposable. But a man who values himself is never replaceable. The next chapter of my life was about to begin, and it wouldn't be easy, but it would be real. No one warns men about the silence. They warn you about loneliness. They warn you about regret. They warn you about starting over. But no one talks about the silence that follows when you finally walk away from a life built on conditions. The silence isn't peaceful at first. It's loud. The night I left, I didn't feel heroic. I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, like someone had reached into my chest and removed something I'd carried for years. Not love, responsibility. When your identity has been wrapped around being needed, walking away feels like failure, even when it's freedom. I stayed somewhere modest, quiet, empty, the kind of place that echoes when you move. That first night, I sat on the edge of the bed fully dressed, staring at the wall, listening to my own breathing. No one was waiting for me to perform. No one was measuring my output. No one was evaluating my future. And that terrified me. Because for the first time in a long time, I had no role to play. The next morning, I woke up early out of habit. My body still expected pressure, deadlines, responsibility, someone else's expectations. But there was nothing. Just me. That's when the crash came. Not sadness, not anger, emptiness. The kind that forces you to ask uncomfortable questions. Who am I when I'm not providing? What do I offer when no one is watching? What is my worth without function? Men are not taught how to answer those questions, so I sat with them. Days passed quietly, too quietly. My phone barely rang. That surprised me. People who praised my commitment disappeared. People who benefited from my reliability faded out. The silence showed me something painful and necessary. Most people don't miss you. They miss what you did for them. That realization hurt, but it also sharpened my awareness. I started noticing how often, even outside my marriage, I had been valued for usefulness rather than presence. I was the man people called when they needed solutions, the one who handled things, the one who absorbed stress. And now, there was no one to absorb it for. So it surfaced, in waves. One evening I broke down alone, not loudly, quietly, the kind of breakdown men don't talk about. Tears without sobbing, pain without sound. I wasn't crying over her. I was crying over myself. Over the years I spent trying to earn love. Over the silence I swallowed to keep peace. Over the parts of myself I abandoned to remain acceptable. That night something shifted. For the first time I wasn't ashamed of my pain. I let it exist, and that changed everything. I started journaling, writing down truths I had avoided. I wrote, I mistook pressure for purpose. I mistook tolerance for love. I mistook being needed for being valued. Those sentences hurt, but they grounded me. As the days passed, something else became clear. She didn't reach out. No messages, no checking in, no second thoughts, and oddly, that gave me peace. Because people who love don't disappear easily. They fight, they question, they grieve. She reorganized. That told me everything. I realized that the relationship hadn't ended when I walked out. It had ended long before, the moment I stopped being useful. I started rebuilding slowly, not financially, not socially, internally. I reconnected with things I had neglected, long walks without a destination, books I never had time to read, silence without guilt. At first it felt uncomfortable, because silence forces self-awareness. But over time it became grounding. I noticed my posture changing, my breathing slowing, my thoughts clarifying. I wasn't rushing anymore. And for the first time, I wasn't apologizing for existing. One night I asked myself a question that changed everything. If I never marry again, will I still feel complete? The answer surprised me. Yes. Not because I rejected love, but because I stopped outsourcing my worth. That was the real transformation. A few weeks later, I ran into someone we both knew. They asked, "How's married life?" I paused, then said calmly, "It ended." They looked shocked. "I'm sorry," they said automatically. I smiled, not politely, but genuinely. "It needed to," I replied. That response felt powerful, because it came from truth, not bitterness. I started understanding something deeper. The pain wasn't from losing her. The pain was from realizing how long I stayed where I wasn't chosen. And staying too long changes you. It makes you smaller, quieter, more cautious. Walking away didn't fix everything, but it stopped the bleeding. As time passed, I noticed something else. My standards changed, not just for relationships, but for myself. I stopped over-explaining, stopped chasing validation, stopped measuring success by approval. I started asking better questions. Does this align with who I am? Does this respect my energy? Does this require me to disappear? If the answer was yes, I walked away. No drama, no justification, just clarity. One evening, alone again, I reflected on her final words. Love alone isn't enough. She was right, but not in the way she meant. Love without respect isn't enough. Love without partnership isn't enough. Love without shared values collapses. But love without money, without guarantees, that's where you discover who's real. I realized something else too. I didn't hate her. I had compassion. Because fear drives people to prioritize safety over connection. And fear-driven love always becomes conditional. But compassion doesn't require proximity. Understanding doesn't require staying. I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. Forgiveness released me from replaying the past. And once the past lost its grip, the future opened. But something unexpected happened. As I became more grounded, she resurfaced, not dramatically, subtly, a message, a question, a neutral check-in. And that's when the final test arrived. Because when someone who valued you for convenience sees you standing strong alone, they begin to question their choice. But I was no longer available for reassessment, and how I responded to that message would define who I had become. There's a moment that comes after healing, when the past tests you one final time. Not to hurt you, but to measure how much you've changed. By the time she reached out, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't longing. I wasn't replaying conversations in my head at night. I was stable. Not the kind of stability she once demanded, but the kind that comes from self-respect. Her message appeared on my phone late one evening. Short, neutral. "Hey, I hope you're doing okay. No apology, No reflection, no accountability, just a door cracked open, carefully. Old me would have read that message 10 times, wondered what it meant, hoped it meant something. New me read it once, and felt nothing. That's how I knew I had changed. I didn't respond immediately, not to punish her, not to gain power. I just didn't feel urgency. And urgency is what once controlled me. The next day, another message. I've been thinking about things lately. Thinking, not missing, not regretting, thinking. I sat with that word for a long time, because people who loved you don't think about you when you're gone, they feel you. Still, I replied calmly, I'm doing well. I hope you are too. Nothing more, no invitation, no warmth, just clarity. That response shifted the tone instantly. She replied faster than before. Do you ever think about us? There it was, not me, not what happened, us, as a concept, as a possibility, as an option. I stared at that message for a long time, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I realized something important. She wasn't coming back because she loved me. She was coming back because her certainty had failed. Life hadn't delivered what she expected, and now she was reassessing. I asked myself a simple question. If nothing had gone wrong for her, would she be here? I already knew the answer. I replied honestly, I think about what I learned, not about going back. That response unsettled her. She called me. I let it ring. Then I answered. Her voice sounded softer than I remembered. Careful, almost unfamiliar. I didn't expect you to be so distant, she said. Distant. That word again. I smiled quietly. I'm not distant, I said. I'm grounded. She sighed. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. That sentence used to mean everything to me. Now it meant very little. I know, I replied, but intention doesn't erase impact. There was a pause. Then she said something revealing. I just didn't feel safe back then. Safe. Always that word. I know, I said calmly, and I don't judge you for wanting safety. That surprised her, but I won't build my life around proving it to someone. Silence. She tried again. I've changed, she said. I asked a question that mattered. How? She hesitated. I've realized money isn't everything, she said. That sounded rehearsed. I didn't argue. I asked, was that realization born from growth or disappointment? She didn't answer. And again, silence answered for her. I realized then that she wasn't reaching out from love. She was reaching out from uncertainty. And I refused to be someone's backup plan. I told her something that closed the door gently, but firmly. You didn't lose me because of money, I said. You lost me because I was never enough unless I was providing. She said quietly, That's not fair. It's accurate, I replied. She asked the question I knew was coming. Is there any chance we could try again? That question once terrified me. Now it felt like a test I was ready to pass. I took a deep breath. No, I said. Not harshly, not emotionally, just truth. She was stunned. You don't even want to talk about it? She asked. I did my talking while I was still married, I replied. You just didn't hear me then. That sentence ended everything. She tried to defend herself, to explain, to soften the past. But explanations don't rebuild broken foundations. I told her something that defined my transformation. I don't need to be chosen now, I said. I choose myself, she cried then, quietly. And for the first time I felt something genuine for her. Compassion. But compassion is not reconciliation. I didn't rescue her from the consequences of her values, because rescuing someone from their choices teaches them nothing. When the call ended, I sat alone in silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. I realized something profound that night. Walking away didn't make me stronger. Staying away did. Anyone can leave in pain. It takes growth to not return when comfort calls. That was my real victory. I slept deeply that night. No racing thoughts, no regret, just calm. Because I had passed the final test. The past had knocked, and I didn't answer. There's a point after heartbreak when you stop asking why and start asking what. Not why it happened. Not why she acted that way. Not why you weren't enough. But what now? What this experience has taught you. what you'll carry forward, and what you'll never tolerate again. I had learned more about myself than in the previous 10 years of my marriage. The first lesson was brutal, but necessary. 1. Love and provision are not interchangeable. I had spent years equating my effort, financial stability, and sacrifices with love. I believed, if I provide enough, she will love me. But love isn't earned by deposits in a bank or by material comfort. It's earned by emotional presence, loyalty, understanding, and connection. She loved what I could give her, not who I was. And that realization changed everything. The second lesson, 2. Conditional commitment isn't commitment at all. There's a difference between someone who stays through uncertainty and someone who stays only as long as outcomes meet expectations. I discovered that when affection vanishes, the second things get difficult. That isn't weakness in them. That's a red flag, and ignoring it is the biggest mistake a man can make. Lesson 3. Silence can be louder than confrontation. When I stopped over-explaining, trying to please, or negotiating my worth, everything changed. She couldn't manipulate me when I wasn't performing. She couldn't guilt me when I wasn't begging for approval. She couldn't hide behind charm when my neutrality reflected truth. Sometimes walking away isn't enough. Sometimes you have to stop performing before you see the full picture. Lesson 4. People are revealed in stress. It wasn't during lavish vacations or expensive dinners that I discovered her priorities. It was during uncertainty, when bills were delayed, plans shifted, and life demanded flexibility. Affection that follows comfort is not love. Disinterest that follows risk is not weakness. It's the truth in disguise. Lesson 5. Self-respect is the ultimate power. When I finally chose myself, emotionally, mentally, and physically, I became untouchable. Not because I became cold, not because I was indifferent, but because I no longer depended on her validation. She realized too late that the version of me she wanted only existed when I sacrificed myself, and she couldn't reclaim it. Lesson 6. Forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you. I forgave her, not to reconcile, not to restore the past. I forgave her because holding on to anger would have trapped me in the very marriage I had left. Forgiveness is liberation. It is the tool that allows you to step into the next chapter of your life without chains. Lesson 7. True love respects boundaries. I had been loyal to a marriage that demanded I disappear to be enough. Real love doesn't ask you to vanish. It doesn't test you with ultimatums. It thrives when both partners grow, struggle together, and choose each other despite imperfections. And I had never experienced that. Lesson 8. Comfort can be a prison. For years I prioritized comfort, for her, for myself, for the marriage. But comfort without connection is suffocating. Luxury without loyalty is hollow. Safety without respect is bondage. Freedom isn't leaving comfort, it's creating it on your own terms. Lesson 9. Detachment is a mirror. When I emotionally detached, I saw her clearly. No illusions, no excuses, no hope twisted into justification. She didn't reach out because she loved me. She reached out because her certainty faltered. Detachment doesn't make you cruel. It shows reality without the fog of desperation. Lesson 10. Choosing yourself is not selfish, it's survival. I had spent a decade investing in someone who could never value me fully. Walking away wasn't betrayal. Walking away wasn't weakness. Walking away was reclaiming life. By part 9, I was no longer the man she could manipulate. I was the man who knew his worth. I was the man who would never negotiate love. I was the man who would never mistake provision for affection. And that's when the final truth hit me. Love is a partnership, not a contract. Marriage is mutual, not transactional. Life is measured by alignment, not tolerance. When you understand these truths, you stop begging. You stop hoping. You stop apologizing for existing. You start living. And that is exactly what I did next. The arguments, the ultimatums, the heartbreak, all of it had passed. What remained was clarity. I had walked away. I had stopped performing. I had stopped negotiating love, and now I had to rebuild myself. The first step after leaving was accepting reality, not hoping for change, not wishing for remorse, not imagining that things could go back to normal. Acceptance was brutal at first. It meant confronting the fact that a decade of loyalty, sacrifice, and emotional investment had been conditional for someone else. It meant facing the truth. She didn't love me the way I loved her. She loved the security and comfort I represented. Accepting that truth gave me peace. Not peace from loss, peace from clarity. I started journaling daily, writing down thoughts, emotions, and lessons. Writing became therapy. Every page reminded me that my self-worth was not tied to anyone else's decisions. The emotional aftermath of leaving was heavier than I expected. No one tells you how much of yourself you leave behind when you stay in a marriage built on conditional love. I sought therapy, not because I was broken, but to understand myself better. I learned to identify patterns, chasing approval disguised as love, suppressing feelings to maintain peace, assuming responsibility for someone else's happiness. I learned that vulnerability isn't weakness, but giving without reciprocity is. I allowed myself to grieve, not for her, but for the man I had been before I forgot who I was. I grieved quietly, privately, but intentionally. And each day after, I felt lighter. Boundaries became my new foundation. Before I had blurred lines, I overextended myself. I gave more than I received. I sacrificed my needs for someone else's comfort. Now I define non-negotiables. Respect comes first. Emotional honesty is mandatory. Conditional affection is unacceptable. Every relationship I engaged with afterward had to meet these standards. Romantic, social, and professional. This wasn't pride or arrogance. It was self-preservation. Silence remained my strongest tool. She reached out again after weeks, again casually, again neutrally. But I responded only when necessary. Not with emotion, not with negotiation, not with hope. Silence taught me something profound. People reveal their true intentions when you stop performing for them. If love is genuine, it finds a way. If it's conditional, it fades. And in silence I saw clearly who truly cared and who only wanted convenience. After the dust settled, I redefined what love meant. Love is mutual respect, shared growth, willingness to struggle together, loyalty despite uncertainty. Love is never conditional on outcomes. Love doesn't demand perfection. Love doesn't disappear because life gets messy. I realized that my previous understanding had been flawed. I had confused dependence with affection. I had accepted transactional care as love. That mistake cost me a decade. But it also gave me insight, one I would carry forever. I focused on myself, financial independence, not for anyone else, not for appearances, for freedom. I invested in skills I had neglected, hobbies I had ignored, friendships I had postponed. And slowly, life regained color, not bright, not artificial, but real, controlled by me, not dictated by anyone else's expectations. The freedom to be myself without apology became intoxicating. Months after the separation, I returned to that home one last time, not for belongings, not for closure, but for reflection. I walked through rooms where laughter had once been forced, where arguments had been silent and tense, where I had lost myself trying to sustain an illusion. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt liberation. I understood the truth completely. The marriage didn't fail because of her. It didn't fail because of me. It failed because it was built on misaligned values. And once you accept that, freedom isn't just an idea, it's a state of being. Today, I live differently. I value myself first. I invest in relationships that are reciprocal. I honor boundaries. I recognize red flags early. I never compromise my integrity for convenience. This story isn't about hate. It isn't about revenge. It's about clarity, growth, and empowerment. Walking away didn't just end a marriage. It began my life. And that life is mine to shape, with dignity, authenticity, and freedom. If you are listening to this story, know this. You are not defined by someone else's conditional love. You are not measured by what you provide. You are not required to stay in situations that diminish you. The man who chooses himself is unstoppable. The man who respects his own worth is unbreakable. The man who refuses to negotiate love for comfort is free. I lost a marriage, I lost illusions. I lost years of misplaced loyalty. But I gained myself. And that is everything.